For a closer view of life in America from Muslim America's then and now, Saadia Faruqi joins us from Texas. She's a Pakistani-American author, essayist, and interfaith activist. So, Saadia, you moved to the United States a few years before 9/11. Do you have any personal experiences in the way that you, your family, or Muslim friends were treated before and after the attacks?
Well, I came to the U.S. Very close to 9/11, so I didn't really have that much of an experience before. I was a college student. I didn't look Muslim in terms of how I am now because I didn't wear hijab at that time. So my experiences have basically been post 9/11, including raising two kids here who are first generation born Muslim American and watching them go through middle school and high school with those identities has been very eye-opening.
Well, describe some of what you're talking about. I know that you've written a children's book set in current time, so 20 years after 9/11, here we are. But talk about your kids and how things have changed for them and other Muslim Americans when it comes to identity, their perceptions, and their Americanness.
Yeah, for kids growing up today, they don't really have any connection with 9/11. It happened way before they were born. They read about it in history lessons, and that's pretty much it. But for kids like my kids, who are a little bit closer in terms of they see the prejudice that, maybe their elders, their parents are facing, and then they have to hear, for example, my son, who's now 15, he's heard the word terrorist often in school in relation to him or somebody else. And they don't really understand where that's coming from a lot of times. The book that I wrote, Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero, is a middle grade novel about the 20th anniversary, but it also includes journal entries of one character who's writing from the time the attacks happened. And for that, I took interviews of countless adults who were in middle school, who were kids, say, aged 10 to 12 years old when 9/11 happened. And those interviews were just so heartbreaking in terms of how kids 20 years ago struggled with suddenly having their peers, their classmates, even their teachers, or their neighbors suddenly see them as the enemy. And I see the same thing happening today. So it's 20 years later, but a lot of things have not changed at all.
And that's interesting you point that out because, as we know, this is a very politically divided country in many different ways. And then we've seen this recent U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and a new influx of Afghan refugees coming to the United States. Do you think they will be treated with less bias?
Well, I mean, there's always the hope, right? And as a children's author, I always look at things with hope because that's what I want to teach my readers and my kids and anybody who's from the younger generation. But still, we do have a lot of bias. There are a lot of organizations that are working on, like me, interfaith work and interfaith dialogue, and books like mine and other books that are there that teach some of those lessons of being allies and being open and welcoming and tolerant of other people. Hopefully those will make a difference. But, there are still a lot of places in the U.S., especially smaller towns and cities that are not that diverse, where everybody looks the same and worships the same. I think that it would be harder for them to change their ways. But I'm always hopeful.
You mentioned hope. We're about 30 seconds away from having to say goodbye, but very quickly, we are seeing Muslim representation in the U.S. Congress and in other leadership positions, CEOs of major companies. So a little bit of progress, but what more needs to happen?
We need to be talking to each other in our communities. Maybe it's a book club, maybe it's a dinner or a potluck or a block party in your neighborhood. But once you get to know your neighbors and learn about them, you'll find that, we're not that different, right, regardless of how we worship or how we look.
All right. Saadia Faruqi, thank you so much for joining us from Houston, Texas. We appreciate your time.